Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing team of Super Marcey and Bede Jermyn. How you doing today?
Oh, not too bad, thanks, Ken. How are you?
I am doing very, very well, and I do want to say, misspoke out of American history and my own history. It is Bede Jermyn. I'm sorry about that. Like I said, I'm trying really hard to do this, but man, my American tongue just does not want to cooperate with me. So, Marcy, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you so much for having us here with you today.
Oh, seriously, such an honor. But before we talk about the reason you guys are here, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. They are film critics, writers, podcasters that run the film website, the Super Network, which is home to the podcasts that they host together, the Super Podcast, Podcasters of Horror, the King's Own Podcast, the To Be Tuesdays Project, which that's brilliant, by the way. I just want to throw that out there because that one just rolls right off the tongue. And the award-winning show Ozploitcast. Also, separately, Marcy hosts the solo show After Dark with Super Marcy and co-hosts the King Zone's Book Club podcast, while Bade hosts the solo show Bade vs. the Living Dead and co-hosts Bade and Steve versus Camp Crystal Lake. So, man, if there was a hat that could have way too many feathers, those would be the hats that you two own. So let's start with you first, Bade. What got you started into podcasting?
Actually, it's all because of Marcy, very much. She and I became friends 15 odd years ago. And of course, she had her own show, which was the Super Podcast at the time. And then, of course, I sort of was getting into podcasts at the time too, listening to it. And then I just simply asked you, Marcy, can I come on one of your shows? And then it kind of just started from there and then spiraled into absolute madness ever since.
That's awesome. And it's one of those things where it's almost an addiction, like the healthiest type of addiction. Once you get started, you just have so much fun and you don't want to stop. So obviously, Marcy, you got him involved. What got you started in podcasting?
That's a good question. It was so long ago, I don't quite remember. It was a new thing back in 2009, I believe. And I enjoyed listening to the podcasts that were out there, and it was like, I can do this. So I decided to do it. And those early days were rough, but they were fun. And yeah, just haven't quite stopped since. So it's hard to stop, especially when you have new ideas, and that's how we have several other podcast shows together, and of course our separate podcasts.
Right. And that's what I was going to say, you guys, that's the best thing is you don't have to try to put everything down into one circle. You don't have to grind everything down into one aspect. You have so many different podcasts and so many different ways to do it that you have so many different avenues that you can take. Now, how do you find the time to do all these things at once, Marcy?
I don't. We are now on a very strict schedule, which is helping a lot. And it certainly feels a lot less daunting with all the research, movie watching for all these podcasts. But yeah, it's I think it's a very solid discipline
Yeah.
that you need to, okay, I have to do this for this podcast. But a lot of our podcasts do involve watching things, researching, but some of them we just don't need to do that. So that helps certainly.
See, and that was the thing I was going to ask you now, Babe. When you're doing all these different podcasts, do you ever find it harder to put your attention into one because you're so focused on another? Or are they all just such a passion project that it's so easy to flow from one right to the next?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely the latter. I think because we're very passionate about all of our shows, whether it is the ones for the Super Network or our own individual podcasts, that it's pretty easy to just get swept up with every single one of them and just feel passionate about it. So, like, I don't find it daunting at all if I'm doing a whole bunch of different podcasts all at once because the topics that we always explore with each of our shows are just so interesting and unique that you can't help but feel just hyped up when you're recording them. So yeah, I don't see it as daunting whatsoever. But like Marcy said, it's always a lot of fun when we do get around to recording them.
Mhm. And the good thing is, guys, I know even just listening and hearing this, it sounds overwhelming. But the best thing is, you don't have to go far to find their podcast because they're going to have a podcast that is going to catch your ear. And I promise you, you are going to fall in love. And the best way to do that is by following the links down in the description. I have the links for all the podcasts as well as their social media links. So you can follow them on social media and become not just their podcasting family, but their social media family as well. So they also have good boys, which we like to see. So,
Yeah, no, I have a dog who doesn't like me podcasting and he always wants attention when I'm podcasting.
I will not complain about it. I will never complain. I will never complain about being able to see a puppers. So, in order for you guys to do, podcasters of horror, King's Own podcast, To Be Tuesdays, anything with these horror related podcasts, horror had to start for you somewhere. So now I would like to go back to the past and talk about what it was that got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And I'll start with you first this time, Marcy. Your first horror movie was
Ghostbusters, which I guess you could question how much of a horror movie it is, but when you're a 6-year-old kid, that's a horror movie.
I've always been on the boat that Ghostbusters is totally a horror flick. If you take out your Saturday Night Live cast and you make it just regular people, nobody's going to even argue that fact at all.
No, absolutely not. It is definitely a horror movie, and that would have been my first experience into horror movie type elements. Ghostbusters obviously has some jump scares and stuff like that. It has creepy looking ghosts. It has funny ghosts. Let's not forget Slimer. Like, he was not part of the scary part, but yeah, it was Ghostbusters, and I'm not ashamed of that. It is still one of my favorite films to this day, and it is like a film that helped shape me. So if I didn't have the experiences I had in watching Ghostbusters, I wouldn't be Super Marcey.
100%. That's why I love talking about people's first horror movies, because without them, we would not be the people that we are today. I totally agree with you. So what about you, Bede? Your first horror movie was?
Well, surprisingly, it was Ghostbusters 2.
Do you mean Ghostbusters also, or Ghostbusters Part 2?
Part 2, I should say.
Which is funny because I feel like Ghostbusters is a horror comedy. I feel like Ghostbusters 2 is a comedy horror. Still horror. Still 100% horror, but I feel like it's a little bit more goofy or wonky than Part 1. But I'm also one of those people, which I know is a hot take, everybody. I'm sorry. Ghostbusters 2 is my favorite in that franchise. And I know for everybody else, it's the least favorite. It's the least favorite. It's my favorite in this franchise, guys. I love Ghostbusters 2. So I'm so excited to talk about it. So, Bede, do you remember about how old you were the first time you'd seen Ghostbusters 2?
Well, the movie came out in 89, so I would have been about 5 when it came out, and I actually saw it in the cinema, which makes it even more daunting, because I think at the time I was introduced to Ghostbusters via the animated TV series, The Real Ghostbusters. Sure. So I was a big fan of that show as a kid. So when the movie was coming out, pretty much my siblings and I and our parents, we went and saw that in the cinema. And it's kind of funny, though, because like it wasn't the film that made me into a horror fan, but being that it is the first horror film I ever saw, it definitely has a special place in my heart, particularly because, as you say, it's definitely more comedy horror compared to the first. Like, there's a lot of really funny moments throughout. But when the horror actually does hit, it actually can be still pretty creepy. So, and there were moments throughout this film that legit I was creeped out by.
Right. And I agree. I could not agree more. And like I said, we'll get more in depth about that here in just a second. But Marcy, do you remember who you were with the first time that you had seen Ghostbusters?
I don't remember. I just remember that I used to watch it all the time. I feel like maybe it was a constant like video rental, but I always wanted to watch it. Yet there was one particular scene that used to freak me out and I couldn't watch it. And then after that scene, I'd be able to watch the rest of the movie. But it got to a point where everyone was kind of like, you need to just be able to watch the whole movie all the way through, kind of thing. Because, I was like 6, 7. I think at that point, like the second one was on video. So I would watch that. And it was just this one thing in this one particular movie that just freaked me out.
Well, I mean, that's the perfect segue because that's actually my next question. Which scene was it, Marcy, that affected you the most?
It's almost embarrassing now because I did rewatch both films back to back in prep to talk. So I wanted to like relive these memories. And I still remember that being very scared and panicked when this scene comes up. And it's when Dana gets like I think it's the hellhounds kind of grab her on the couch and they suck her into the kitchen, which I assume would be through the fridge because earlier in the film she sees like that hellscape in her fridge. And it was once they started grabbing her and then seeing them kind of pulling her that I could not watch as a kid. Now I'm totally fine, but I still remember those feelings. And I think it was being like taken against your will into something you saw was kind of horrifying before. Everything else in that film, I was fine. Slimer, fine. The creepy, oh God, I'm trying to think of all the freaking ghosts, but there's a lot of creepy things in the film. And it was just that particular thing. And even then, like the hellhounds creeped me out, but I could look at them. I could not look at Dana kind of being transported away.
See, for me, because I agree, that's a scene that's always affected me. The one that got me as a kid was the librarian. That was the one that got me. Get her! Rah! Like for me as a kid, I was like, I'm out. Nope, I'm done. Like never going to the library again. That's why I don't read, guys. It's Ghostbusters' fault. So I totally understand. Now, Bede, I got to know with you, Ghostbusters 2, very effective film. Which was the scene that affected you the most?
It was definitely the scene where baby Oscar is out on the ledge and the ghost version of Janos in sort of like this weird sort of nanny outfit comes and grabs him. And that scene when I was a kid was terrifying. And I think one of the reasons why that is, and rewatching the film again in prep for being on your show, Ken, is I think I know what it is. I think it was the eyes because Giannis's eyes go red. And I think I read somewhere like a while back, they did a study on childhood fears, as particularly with films. And it said that kids tend to be more terrified of any characters if they have red eyes. But if they have different other color eyes, it doesn't affect them as much. But the red eyes just mess them up even more. And I think as a kid, that's probably what really got to me as well. But that scene in particular, especially rewatching it again, there's nothing comical about this scene. It actually is a very creepy scene and just how it's staged and handled.
See, and I agree with that because that to me has always been the scariest moment in that movie. Because you have the anxiety of Oscar being on the balcony or the walkway anyway, right there, out there, and then Janos the long arm that grabs him and pulls him in on that bike. And then you talk about the red eyes. That makes sense because when the judge reveals himself to be evil in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and his eyes are all crazy and scary. That shit scared me so. It's Roger Rabbit, guys. I know. But the scene at the end where the judge, he looked like that. Like, oh my God, that scared the shit out of me as a kid. I was like, nope, I'm out. I'm done. So I kind of like to mix the questions up a little bit. But since we're talking about the same franchise, we've gotten a reboot of Ghostbusters in sorts. We've gotten a requel with Ghostbusters Afterlife, which will continue this year at the time of filming with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So I'll start with you first, Bede. Have you seen Afterlife? And if so, are you excited for Frozen Empire?
Surprisingly, I still haven't seen Afterlife yet. I own it because I got it in like a free 4K pack with the first two films, but I'm going to have to watch it in prep, especially with Frozen Empire come out. It's one of those films that surprisingly you think, oh, I'll be there opening day to see it. But around the time when it came out, I was just so busy with a whole bunch of stuff that I completely missed it at the cinema. And then I thought I'll just buy it when it comes out. And I did. and I still haven't gotten around to it. So now that Frozen Empire is coming out in a few months, I definitely need to finally just get around to watching it. But I can't. But even then, though, I'm excited to see that and also Frozen Empire because you can never have enough Ghostbusters in your life.
I will say this: I sobbed during Afterlife. Sobbed. I was crying in the theater watching that movie. That's all I'm going to say. I don't spoil movies for people. I think that's the most dickhead thing you can do. But I cried like a baby during Afterlife. That's all I'm going to say. So what about you, Marcy? Have you seen Afterlife? And if so, what were your thoughts on that? If not, are you excited for Frozen Empire?
Yeah, I have seen Afterlife. It is one of the more recent films of the past few years I have managed to see. And much like you, I sobbed. A lot of it for me, like it is nostalgia, but I like that it kind of ties in that modern with the old in a I think it was an interesting way. I really enjoyed the characters a lot. There was good nostalgia throwbacks, but I don't think it got to the point where it was too much and it was pandering. I think it
Right.
got the levels really well, and I am quite excited for the next one. As Bede said, there's nothing wrong with more Ghostbusters, and I've been a Ghostbuster since I was a kid. And again, like the animated show was a big thing growing up as well. And I'm one of the few fans of the 2016 version. So,
You know what? And I've touched on this on the podcast before. I really like the 2016 version a lot.
Hmm.
My problem with that movie is not a female cast because I had a lot of people like, "Oh, it's just a female Saturday Night Live cast." I'm like, the original was all Saturday Night Live guys. What the hell are you talking about? Like, that's literally what it was. It was a bunch of Saturday Night Live guys doing a horror movie. That's why it was funny. My problem with the 2016 one is it felt like they left the horror completely out. I laugh a lot watching that movie. I think it's fantastic. I don't have a problem with the movie, but growing up as like you guys said, as a Ghostbuster myself, I've been a Ghostbuster like probably 8 different Halloweens in my life. The most recent being 3 years ago with my family. Huge fans of the movie, huge fans of the franchise. As a fan of the Ghostbuster franchise, I don't like how little horror they put in the 2016 version. And that's the only problem I have with that movie. The acting was phenomenal. The story was great. The leads were fucking fantastic. Chris Hemsworth was brilliant in his role. Like I said, the only problem I have is the lack of horror in the movie.
Yeah, it
Besides
leaned
that,
too much on comedy rather than try to add in some kind of horror, which I appreciate. Like that's what they managed to do with two, even though it is more of a comedy. When they have those horror elements, you remember them pretty well, and that is what I think that one was missing. Was it just needed a little bit more of genuine scares?
right. And I have people like, that movie's fucking garbage. I'm like, dude, stop. Either you haven't seen it or you really like reading the internet because there's nothing wrong with the film. The film, I think, is great. I like it. I just wish it would have been more horror. I think me and you were on the exact same page there. So, I've had an amazing time talking to you guys about Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2, and also the scene in Ghostbusters 2 where Vigo comes to life for the first time.
Oh yeah,
Pee Pants territory. That's completely Pee Pants territory for me. But here, real quick, guys, I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball at you here for a second. And you're lucky this time, Bede, because you get to think about this one for a second. Marcy, you don't, because we're up to you. You get the first question. So we know what your guys' first horror movies was, but now my little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Marcy? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
My favorite horror movie of all time is Reanimator. That is the easiest question I can answer because it's been that way since the day I saw it. It is, for me, it is the perfect blend of horror comedy. It is ridiculous. It's got great performances. I love everything about it. It really made me into a huge Stuart Gordon fan, Brian Usner fan, Jeffrey Combs fan, Barbara Crampton fan. And it got me into H.P. Lovecraft and reading those stories. So it's 100% Reanimator all day, every day.
Love it. Love it. fantastic movie. In March, I get to meet a lot of the cast and crew from Reanimator, so I'm very, very excited for that. They're
I'm
coming to a con right
very
by me,
jealous.
so very
Very
excited
jealous.
about
Although
that
I
one.
will add, I have met Jeffrey Combs and we did hold hands, so that was cool.
Ooh. So I got to one up you now, Jeffrey. I'm coming for a kiss. Um, so, okay, you get to ask him. I know. Hold on a second, buddy. All right, Bede. Well, now it's your turn. What's your favorite scary movie, Bede? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
It's definitely the Blair Witch Project. That's a film that even 25 years after it came out, every time I watch it, it still creeps me out. And I was one of those weirdos at the time who thought it was real when it came out until, because, the marketing to that movie made it feel like it was an actual real documentary. And then, of course, not long after that, I kind of figured out the truth. But even then, though, it hasn't really lost its power as a horror film, the simplicity of it, and it just feels like, compared to other found footage horror films that have come out since, what I think makes the Blair Witch Project still very effective as a film is it feels real in the way that it's shot, the way that it's performed. Like, if you put this movie on a videotape and just dropped it somewhere, which they did do in one of the marketing, and somebody watched it, they would legit think this was real. That's
Yes.
that to me is what comes down to with a found footage film. Does it feel real? And it's just a genuinely creepy movie with so many scenes that still unnerve me to this day. And also, I mean, this is a movie that it scared me so much the first time I watched it. I have not been camping ever since. I refuse to go camping because of this movie.
Right. See, and two found footage movies, I think, have the best marketing of all time. One being the Blair Witch Project. And I was, a 14-year-old punk rock kid when that came out. I was a little dumbass. And I was like, I remember people that have watched this podcast before, they've heard this story. Complete true story, hand on a Bible, on my mother's ashes. This is a true story. I remember I was standing out in front of my friend Sarah Tuckerman's house with my green mohawk, and I had my cigarette, my leather jacket, and I was like, that shit's real, man. Heather was my cousin, bro. She's dead. They never found her. Like, I was such a little dumb punk kid that I thought I was cool. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, it's a real story, man. And she's totally gone. We'll never see her again. You know what I mean? Like, I was just a little dumbass. And I'm not afraid to admit it now because I'm 37 and I'm, a little more mature. But that and the marketing for Paranormal Activity were perfect marketing. I don't know if you guys remember, but the trailers for Paranormal Activity was just literally footage of people in the movie theater screaming and jumping. It's like, find out what they're jumping at, find out what they're scared of, Paranormal Activity. And it's like, whoa, that's a badass trailer, because now I want to know what the hell they're jumping at, because I have no idea what you guys are watching. So always been a big fan of found footage, like you said, when it's done right and it feels real. I don't like found footage when it's used as a ploy. Like, it's just, let's do a found footage movie just to make it look like somebody's holding a camera. No, it's got to be genuine. It's got to be real. That's what I love the most about it. So, well, I got to say, guys, I've had an amazing time talking about your first horror movie, your favorite horror movies. But before I let you go, I want to bounce back to your first horror movies real quick. And I'll start with you first this time, Bede. We're going to go back to Ghostbusters 2. And what we're going to do is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being critics. What we're doing here, Bede, is ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Bede, what would your ranking of Ghostbusters 2 be?
You know what? I'm going to go with 4 skulls. Like, it's really kind of that scene with Danny Janos and also Vigo being like the creepiest scenes in the film. But there are a lot of scenes outside of that even though they do feature some pretty amazing looking ghosts and creepy moments, they didn't hit me as hard as those 2 instances. And also, like you say, this one definitely leans more into the comedy compared to the first. So yeah, I think, 4 skulls definitely is very serviceable for a film like Ghostbusters 2. Like, it hit me pretty hard as a kid, but I wasn't too freaked out by it to not still enjoy it.
Perfect ranking. Because like I said, My favorite in the franchise. I love it as well. So how about you, Super Marcy? What would you rank Ghostbusters 0 to 5 skulls?
It is 5 skulls. It's a film that honestly, like rewatching it yesterday, I'm like, this really did just help make me into who I am today. So without a doubt, it is 5 freaking flaming skulls of Stay Puff Marshmallow Man.
Yes. And that's a skull I would definitely eat. And I do want to say real quick, do you guys remember the high C, that the orange high C that was Slimer, like the slimy high C stuff? Do you guys remember those at all?
I think so, because I remember like even as a kid collecting a lot of the Ghostbusters toys, including Slimer, but I'm not
I
exactly
would
sure if I
give
do remember that.
Mm.
Look it up. It was the best, and I wish I could have it again. Anybody's out there listening, if someday, please find a way to create me that old Slimer high C, because it was the best. It was an orange high C, and it was so good. It was a delicacy to me. That's like on death row last meal thing. It's like everything I want with Slimer high C. That's what I want. Um, so yeah, look that up when we're done here. Maybe you guys, maybe when you see the cartridge, it'll click and remind you. But
Yeah.
um, I know I said it at the beginning, guys, but we are at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, make sure you are subscribing to their podcast on whichever platform you use, and make sure you're following them on social media. All those links, once again, are down in the description. So, guys, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really does help to grow the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Our links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.